Hi, my name's June. I'm an alcoholic. And thank you so much, Bruce, for inviting me and the group for having me out here tonight. And I want to thank a bunch of my buddies that showed up tonight. When I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't have anybody that would have even accepted a collect phone call from me. So it's really nice to have some people that made an effort, to not be in their pajamas, which is where, I might be if I wasn't here now. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. It has given me a life I never would have wanted, and it's made me a person that I wouldn't have even liked when I got here. And so I've been really fascinated, with the journey here. I want to congratulate all those people who took chips, anyone who's new here, whether you had identified yourself as new or not. They've asked me to go ahead and talk for a little while. I'm a time filler. That's really what I believe. And I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I went to 21 meetings a week for the first 2.5 years that I was sober, not because I was trying to get a gold star in AA, but because I had absolutely no place else to go. I didn't have an indoor place to live a lot of the time in those early years. And so I went to meetings and I went early and I stayed late. But, I owe a debt to thousands of members of Alcoholics Anonymous, most of whose name I can't remember, can't necessarily tell you what they said, certainly can't quote anything that they said from the big book or anything else. I'm more likely to be able to tell you if they told a story about having a Doberman that drank vodka or something. That's what kind of sticks with me. But, I had no place to go. And a lot of those members of Alcoholics Anonymous, because of Alcoholics Anonymous, they had a lot of places to go. Alcoholics Anonymous had given them a full life. Like it talks about in our literature, they had reunited with their family. I wasn't invited back to a family event in my family until I was 5 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. And a lot of them had jobs, or like Marcia mentioned, some of them had gone back to school and they had really full lives. And, during the last couple of years, I'm pretty sure it was a Zoom meeting that I was at, but I heard someone and they said, don't let the life that Alcoholics Anonymous gives you take you away from Alcoholics Anonymous. And I thought, wow, that's a really powerful thing. Any of us that have been sober for a while, we've seen that. We've seen it happen, and it could happen to any one of us. I'm very grateful that I've stayed very close to Alcoholics Anonymous. But what I wanted to say is that, when I got sober, and sadly, even sometimes today, I can't listen to everything that's going on in the meeting. I still frequently need to think about myself. And more so when I was new, but sadly, it's not perfect yet. So if you are new or visiting, if I could just ask you to listen for the next maybe 2 minutes, hopefully I'll be able to say it even faster. I'm going to tell you the most important thing that I'm going to say no matter how many minutes they leave me up here. And the most important thing that I would say is that I am not an expert on alcoholism, on Alcoholics Anonymous, on any page in the big book, on any step, on anything at all. I'm simply a member, and I'm going to share for a little while my experience, strength, and hope. And the second thing that I always like to try and say, because it's really important to me, I believe it's really important for all of us in Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's been personally very important for me, is that Alcoholics Anonymous is absolutely free. If Alcoholics Anonymous had not been free, I couldn't have come here. If Alcoholics Anonymous had not stayed free, I could not have stayed here. I was over 10 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous before I could ever afford to put $1 in the basket at the Seventh Tradition. And by the way, I have not always been able to put $1 in that basket since I was 10 years sober. And I want you to know it's not about money. And I think that's really important. We do this for fun and for free. We give it away because it's been given to us for free, it's kind of funny. A number of years ago, a woman came up to me after at a meeting, and she said, I remember hearing you talk when I was new. And you think, wow, that's kind of neat. Someone remembers something that you said when they were new and they've been sober a while. She said, yeah. She said, you said you were over 10 years sober before you could afford to put $1 in the basket. And she said, and I thought, what a loser. So, you never know what's going to stick with somebody. So I grew up in an alcoholic home. I grew up with a lot of violence. I grew up with a lot of broken promises, and I grew up with some other things, types of abuse that were happening in my home. They don't happen in every home. But I'll tell you this, by the time I was 5 years old, I was done. I didn't want to be here anymore. I didn't want to be on the planet. I was not looking forward to anything. I didn't have any dreams. I didn't have any goals. I wanted out. And thankfully for me, within the next few years, I was introduced to alcohol. And I happen to be one of those people that we describe in the doctor's opinion and in our literature. I get a special reaction to alcohol. And I'm as grateful for the reaction that I got from alcohol or to alcohol as I am today for what Alcoholics Anonymous has done in my life. Because life just always hurt too much for me. You know, one of our old timers that's passed away now, Clancy, used to talk about being a person born without any insulation whatsoever for their emotions. And that was me. And so life always hurt. You know, as a kid, growing up in, that home, I went to, I'm pretty sure I counted it up one time. I went to 18 grammar schools, 7 junior highs, 5 high schools. I've only finished 7th grade. And so I was always the new kid. I was always tall. I was always skinny. I had much redder hair as a kid and these curls. And so I was frequently teased. And I'll tell you, when I first got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, I could still tell you who they were, what they said, what they were wearing, and how it felt. And that's not good. You know, our big book talks about that we often suffer from a crippling sensitivity. And that doesn't mean that it's kind of sweet that you're sensitive and that. It's crippling, And so life was very painful for me, and people were really painful for me. So when I found alcohol, I'd already been using other substances. I mixed it with that, and it allowed me to live, to get by. I'm not a party girl. Never had a social drink, I don't believe, in my life. I've only always gotten drunk. That was the point for me. Again, if you're new, I want to encourage you to go to lots of meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, because there are as many ways to drink as there probably are people in this room, and a lot of them had a lot of fun party years, but that's not my story. I didn't drink to feel good. I drank to not feel anything at all, and I'm very grateful that it worked that way for me. I grew up in Venice, California. My mom was a bar drinker, and so I saw a lot of violence. Not just happening in my home, but, in the world. And before I came to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I do not ever remember seeing a man cry under any circumstances. And in my life, I've seen him shot, I've seen him stabbed, I've seen them arrested. I saw people, their kids overdose and die. I saw, all kinds of stuff. I don't ever remember seeing a man cry. That doesn't mean it's true that someone didn't. I just don't remember it. And the women in my life, a lot of them were pretty tough, but most of them cried over one or another of those incidents. And I looked at those two different groups, and I'm an only child, and I looked at those two different groups of people, and I know today I was mostly looking at, at least heavy drinkers, if not alcoholics, as I, sized up humanity. And what I saw was that men don't feel pain. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to not feel any pain, ever. And men only feel anger. And that's what I believed life was going to, be about. And alcohol allowed me to live that way. And without alcohol, I totally could not live that way, So, in growing up in Venice, it was important that I be in a gang, and I was. It was important that I do a lot of fighting, and I did. It's important to me that I remember to mention that I've never won a fight in my life. But I've never fought less than 5 people at a time. My sponsor explained to me, that's probably because if you fight one person and you lose, people might think you're not very good at fighting. But if you always fight a group of 5 or more, no one's expecting you to win. And so, I found for me that I was willing to pay the price of having a black eye or a swollen lip or, whatever. And, I also found that I would much rather you punch me in my face than hurt my feelings. And that's really the way that I lived my life before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I was very good at getting people to want to or to actually punch me in my face. My mom is the alcoholic, although my dad was too, but I never met him. My mom was the alcoholic, and she was going to be in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous with various periods of sobriety for 40 years. And then she was to get sober again, and she passed away this year, and she died with 19 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. And she had various periods of sobriety, in those 40 years. But I'll tell you, probably the number one thing that my mom taught me is that this is a progressive disease. That if you're an alcoholic of the type that we talk about here, it gets worse, never better. And I'm extremely grateful to the old timers that were here when I got here, because, by the time I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I would have rather died than gotten sober. And I spent a lot of time trying to die. I tried to put myself in positions where someone else might take my life. I tried taking my own life, and I tried praying to a God I was losing faith in to please let me die. Let me not wake up. Let me out. So when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, if the old timers here had said, the way you drink and the way you live out on the streets of Venice, if you keep doing that, for another 6 months, you're going to be dead. If they could have promised me that, I would have run out and kept drinking. What they told me is they said, if you're an alcoholic of our type, it's going to get worse, never better. And I really believed them. I'd listened to these meetings. I listened to these people, and I thought, I'm one of those people. I wouldn't be lucky enough to die. I'm the kind of person that could have gone on doing what I was doing, hating myself more and more, I couldn't even imagine hating myself any more than I did by the time I walked through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous. And to go on living like that day in and day out for another 10 years, 20, 30, 40, like some members of Alcoholics Anonymous had done, a lot of them before Alcoholics Anonymous even existed, because Alcoholics Anonymous is really not all that old. When my mom was born, Alcoholics Anonymous was less than a year old, and she was to go through the hell of alcoholism, and so lots of other people. And so I'm very grateful Alcoholics Anonymous existed. I'm very grateful that the old timers told me that this was a progressive disease. But when I got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, I really was, at the jumping off place, because I didn't want to get sober. I didn't know what to do with the fact that alcohol wasn't working the way that it had worked. It was getting me drunk, but it wasn't taking away the pain and the feelings. And that was a really awful place to be. And I looked in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I saw the people here, and I listened, and I thought, this won't work for me. I'm too broken. I'm too damaged. I'm too sick. I'm too whatever, I'm different, and yet I really had no place else to go. When I started coming to the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, my mom brought me. I didn't want to go to the meeting. I didn't want to get sober. I didn't want to be an alcoholic. I didn't want to join an organization that was allowing my mother to belong to it. I had all kinds of, things going. But, in this 2-week period of time that I went to meetings, I didn't raise my hand because, like I said, I didn't want to be an alcoholic. And I went to some meetings, and in that 2-week period of time, every option but Alcoholics Anonymous was removed. My mother and I had a violent relationship. Between the two of us with our drinking, it was violent often. And she asked me to leave her apartment, and I did. And I never went back. So I never went back home. And like I said, my family didn't want anything to do with me or didn't know where I was until I was 5 years sober. So, I walked out at that time. And I'd been in a lot of foster homes. None of them would take me back. And I looked at a couple of alcohol recovery homes back then. There were three places that I knew of. I called them all. None of them would take me, some because of my age and some just because of my attitude. And I thought, well, you know what? Who cares? Who cares about any of that? Family, foster homes, people, whatever. The only thing that really counts is your gang. And then one day as I was walking down an alley, all 5 members of my own gang beat me up. And so I found myself sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was 87 pounds. I had a black eye. I had a swollen lip. I didn't have any shoes on. I wouldn't have worn them if I did, because I'm a tough broad from Venice Beach, and we have to have tough feet and be able to walk down an alley with broken glass and put lit cigarette butts out. These are the things that filled in my spare time before I got sober. And so I was, sitting in that meeting, and there were some people in that meeting that I know tonight did not know about the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I certainly didn't know about the traditions, and they knew, some of those people knew who I was and how old I was, because my mom had been in and out of that group for, I think, maybe 7 or 10 years already. with varying periods of sobriety. And so they came over to me after the meeting and they said, we don't want a little kid sitting in our meetings while we talk about serious things. And if you come back, we're going to get together and throw you out. And I just thought AA didn't want me either. And I didn't want me either. And so I left that meeting and I went back and found my number one answer, the one I've been using since I was 5 years old. I went over to a friend of my mother's house. I went into her bathroom, which is the first place I went at any home I ever visited. I found enough of the kind of pills I needed to kill myself, and I took enough of them to do it one more time. And then I went to that noon meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. By the time I got there, I couldn't sit, I couldn't stand. I was laying in the meeting. They realized I needed to go to a hospital. That's where I came to. A doctor gave me something to make me throw up and explained that the pills I'd taken were to slow down my heart. And had I been there 5 or 10 minutes later, I would have been in a coma that they probably couldn't have brought me out of. And I don't know why that overdose was any different than all the others that I inflicted upon myself. I just know that it was, because since that time, I haven't taken anything that affects me from the neck up. And that's how I personally define sobriety. And I've done that one day at a time. And if you're new, so has everybody else in this room and in any other meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and sometimes 1 hour at a time. I got active in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Like I said, I went to 21 meetings a week. I couldn't put that dollar in the basket, and I look back now and I see, I guess I had this kind of a pride ego that actually did me a huge favor, but because I couldn't put that dollar in, I always tried to do at least $1 worth of work in my mind at that meeting, because I felt like such a loser. And so I would set up chairs, or I'd be the greeter, or I'd do whatever else it was. And I look back and I see that service and those commitments were one of the greatest gifts that I have ever been given. They were life-changing for me, because you couldn't count on me to do anything before that. And honestly, even in sobriety, you couldn't count on me to do anything that I said, except I always kept those AA commitments. And that has served me really, really well throughout the years. So, I love how we give out the commitments. We don't necessarily interview for the best candidates. And we had this Tuesday night meeting that was about the size of this, the 2+2 group, and they made me the greeter. And when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I smoked. Back then, almost everybody smoked. I don't necessarily think I was always smoking the cigarette, but I was always holding it more like kind of a weapon. So I smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day, and I always had a lit cigarette in my hand. And after I'd been sober a little while, I took up smoking cigars and then a pipe. I wore a motorcycle chain on my wrist and one on my ankle. I had a jacket, and on the back it said, "Do unto others and then split." It was my own spiritual philosophy, I had a very limited vocabulary when I got sober. It consisted mostly of profanity. I found a number of people in AA were very offended by that kind of language, so I'd use it more if they got too close to me. I didn't wear shoes, when I first came to meetings, and I'd just been beaten up by my gang, so I had this black eye and swollen lip, and I'd stand there barefoot with my cigar welcoming the new people as they came to AA. And sometimes you'd hear their sponsor kind of whisper, "You see, if you keep drinking, you can end up like that." And, as I stood at that door, there were people in that room that were guessing my age at 37. If I'd shown you my birth certificate that night, it would have told you I was 13. And if you'd asked me how old I was, I would have told you I felt 1,000. And I did not believe that there was anything in these rooms, in this program, in this book, anything that was ever, how do you ever not feel 1,000 when you've been 1,000? How can that ever happen? I still don't fully understand it, to tell you the truth. But I will tell you, it's kind of a hell of a deal, because I'm standing up here tonight. I've been continuously sober since the 13th of July, 1972, which means I've been sober 51 years. I got sober at 13, and I have... So if you do the math, which I'm very bad at, I was trying to remember, and I thought I should know the answer to this. But anyway, you can see that I'm older than the 37 they were actually guessing me at, and yet I feel younger than I did when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. So hey, that's, there's something there. Let me see, where am I going to go here real quick? Because I don't want to go over. So, so I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I had I had a 7th grade education, and my first sponsor, she wanted me to go to high school and get a high school diploma. And I don't know, to say I tried, I don't know. I went to some high schools. If I felt 1,000 in an AA meeting, I think you'll understand if I tell you I felt like 2,000 in high school class, on a high school campus. It was the most uncomfortable, horrible thing. I just can't even describe it. I couldn't or wouldn't do it, or a combination of all of that. And so my first sponsor said, all right, fine. You don't want to get a high school education? You can get the kind of jobs that people who only have 7th grade educations get. And that's what I got. And I got a lot of them because I was a pretty bad employee. But I kept my meetings, I kept my commitments in Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't drink no matter what. I didn't take anything no matter what, whether I liked you, whether I liked me, whether I liked AA, whether I liked the meeting. It just didn't matter. I just kept showing up and I didn't drink. And I got these, terrible jobs, but they allowed me to have this flexible schedule, you know what I mean? Because I'd have a graveyard shift, or I'd have a split shift, or, whatever it was, and I'd clean apartments on the weekends, or, for people in AA that, needed something done, and, stuff like that. And so when I was a couple years sober, I found a garage. So I was about 3 years sober, I think, and I found a garage that I could rent for $40 a month, and that was the first place that I could live in, because I'd never gone back home, so I was on my own from the time I was 13, and a lot of the time I didn't have a place to stay. And by the way, just in case, because I will jump all around, as you've probably already figured out, but there was a lot of kindness that was offered to me in Alcoholics Anonymous. There were people that would have let me stay, on their couch or at their house, but I couldn't accept that. I couldn't accept that kind of kindness. Sometimes, they'd offer me a place to stay, but they'd say, if you can just let me know, what time you're going to get back. I'm like, I don't do that. I'd rather walk the streets of, Venice Beach. I'm not telling anybody what I'm doing. I just had a rotten attitude and a chip on my shoulder, and I didn't trust anybody, and I didn't like men. I didn't like women, and I didn't like me. So it was really uncomfortable. There were really no happy places. And I'm so grateful for the members of Alcoholics Anonymous that included me. Because, I am telling you, they let me go to coffee with them. They drove me, sometimes places. They let me go to meetings. They let me go on 12-step calls. And, there's this movie, I forget the name. I always forget the name. Thanks, Freaky Friday. Thanks, Debbie. There's this movie called Freaky Friday where this mother and daughter, they change places, something magic happens. But before that happens, this teenage daughter says to her mother, Mom, you are a fun sucker. You suck all the fun out of everything. And I just want you to know, I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was a huge fun sucker. And yet people let me go to their birthday party, they let me, go wherever. But you could just feel, it was like a cloud, sort of like and I would just bring it everywhere and share it, generously, And I, found out later, like in the 12 and 12, it talks about inflicting self-pity is a character defect. I did that all the time for years. And then there's this line in the book, it says, try to avoid the deliberate manufacture of misery. I didn't know that was in there. I was a regular manufacturer of misery for a number of years after I got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. So anyway, eventually, after I got that garage to live in, there was some people in the program, and they were going to let me buy a car, a used car, and but you have to have a driver's license. Well, you don't have to, but if you're going to do it the AA way, they wanted you to have a driver's license, and you can't get a driver's license in California unless you've taken driver's ed or you're 18, and I was 16, and I wanted that driver's license. So I found out that you could take this class at a city college. So I went over there and I took that class at the city college, and while I was there, it was the same price to take more than one class, and while I was standing there, there were people in the lobby there talking about something they called a dummy English class. And, at 3 years sober, if you'd asked me to read chapter 5, I could read it. I could read every word, and you wouldn't know anything was wrong with the way that I could read. But on my own, I would be home, and I would read like a line in the big book, and I couldn't remember what I just read. it was like there was nothing. I couldn't remember people's names. I couldn't remember anything, and I was really scared I'd done permanent damage. And so I thought, I wonder if I take a dummy English class, if that'll help me get my memory to back, help me with that. And so I took those 2 classes, and then the next semester I took a couple more classes, and then I had a bunch of different jobs. I usually had 4 or 5 different part-time jobs, and eventually 1 or 2 of those part-time jobs started to be on a college campus. I could work in the library, I could work in the cafeteria, I could get food, I could clean the apartments on the weekends, and I took more classes, and at the end of 3 years, they told me I'd completed all the requirements for what they called an AA college degree. And no one in my family ever had one. I wasn't really planning on getting one, but I liked the name, the AA thing. I think that'll, and they suggested, and my sponsor did too, that I get a GED so that I'd have that equivalent to a high school diploma, and I took that, and that was not easy for me. There was a lot of math, and, they're asking, like how many feet and, whatever, all this stuff. I'm like drawing little pictures of feet. I have no idea. No idea. I still don't know how to do that. So, but anyway, I passed, and so then I'd come up with a dream. And I don't know when I came up with this dream, but I came up with it, and my sponsor said, you got to do the same footwork anybody in or out of AA has to do if you want to make a dream come true. So I went ahead and I did some more footwork, and I got accepted at a university, and I went to school for a couple more years, and I kept working all these different jobs, and still never had $1 to put in the basket. And I'll tell you, I'd go home, sometimes from a meeting, and I'd find a $5 bill in my pocket. And I never had a $5 bill. And I don't know who did that. I'll never know who did that. Other times I'd come home and there'd be a bag of clothes on my porch, or there'd be a bag of food. And I'd love to tell you that I was, filled with gratitude at the, to see how kind everyone was, but I was like horrified. I felt like such a loser. Who is 10 years sober and people are buying me food, But, my sponsor, and I'd talk to her, and I'd just say, I wish I could find out who they are so I can pay them back. I mean, I'm like an accountant, even though I don't do math. If you gave me $1, I want to give you $1.50. I don't like to be behind. I want to be ahead, this whole thing. And she goes, it doesn't work that way here in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's like spiritual mathematics. You can pass it on to somebody else, but you can't usually give it back to the person who gave it to you. And I didn't necessarily like that at the time, but I understand it a little bit better today, and I am grateful for all those people that were very kind that I never got to thank and don't know who they were. But anyway, and so I kept on going, and then I finished university and had some more footwork I had to do if I wanted to make that dream come true, and I did that footwork, and I got a telegram, and it's been a little over 40-some years ago now, saying that I'd been chosen as one of 300 out of 3,000 applicants to go to law school. I always planned on spending a lot of time in court, but never on that side of the table. And I just, during COVID, I just, resigned. I'd been at my job for over 37 years. I had a job where I believed that I was really able to be of service to a lot of people. I have a job where every single day that I went to work, I saw where alcoholism takes people like me. And I knew that only Alcoholics Anonymous is the only reason I was on one side of the bars, from where so many of my clients were on the other side. I have been overpaid in ways that I could not, no matter how many more minutes you gave me, I wouldn't be able to tell you. But I think that sometimes, because there's only a limited amount of time, so if I go ahead and I tell you that story, then there's a bunch of people, or maybe not a bunch, there's some people, they'll be sitting there and they'll think, oh, okay, so here's the AA success story. She comes in off the streets, she has no money, she has no place to live, she eventually works and goes to school and, stays active in AA, and then she becomes a lawyer, and that's all true. And it is pretty friggin' amazing. I feel like pinching myself because I can't believe it myself. But I want to tell you what I believe is really the most amazing thing that's happened to me in Alcoholics Anonymous, is that I came into Alcoholics Anonymous and I hated every single thing about myself. And I wanted to trade places with absolutely every single person on the planet. I didn't want to look like me. I didn't want to live like me. I didn't want to feel like me. I didn't want anything about me to be happening. And through these years, in Alcoholics Anonymous, I've had these different experiences And it took a long, long time. But now it's been years since I've wanted to be anybody else. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm always happy, joyous, and free about whatever issues are happening in my life, or that I'm always immediately grateful. But usually I get to that point, where I realize, I am just so overpaid, as I said, just to be alive and walking around, and, this program, it's not a sprint, this is a marathon. But we do it a day at a time or an hour at a time. And there's always somebody walking with us if we're willing to ask for help, and let them help. I want to just tell you one other little quick story, and then I'll sit down. When I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I mentioned I could not accept kindness or thank you. I don't have 10 minutes. There's a clock back there. No, that's anyway, when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I couldn't accept kindness from people for the most part, and I would I hitchhiked or I walked or I rode a bus if I had enough money, and I walked a lot and I walked a long way. I lived in Venice, and I actually went to meetings every Wednesday in an area called Las Vegas. And, I drove there a few years ago, and I was like, Jesus, this takes forever driving. You know what I mean? I don't know, how I did it. But part of what I would do is I'd walk, I'd take a bus. If I had enough money, I'd hitchhike, whatever. It filled my time from the time the noon meeting ended until the 7 o'clock one started up there, and they had a 7 o'clock and an 8:30 meeting there. And so I went to that, often. And then, the same thing on Thursday night. There was at the Brentwood group, there was a 7 and an 8:30. So I'd get there usually about 5 and start setting up the chairs. They were metal, and I'd slam them down one at a time, 420 of them. It really was a good feeling. But anyway, so, along the way when when these people would drag me to meetings or drag me to coffee, and, after the coffee we'd get done, and everybody's going home, and I'd go outside, and it's probably, 12 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock at night, I don't know, depending on what night of the week it was, and I'd go out and I'd start hitchhiking. And now before I went out to hitchhike, I want to let you know there were a few members of Alcoholics Anonymous that always would say, can we give you a ride? Do you want a ride? I'm like, no, I don't need a ride. I'd go out and I'd hitchhike. But then sometimes one of them, or one of the ones that had offered, would pick me up hitchhiking, and then I'd get in the car. Somehow that felt different to me. I don't fully understand it yet. And, but it made sense to me at the time. And one of the people that used to pick me up today is my sponsor, Bob. And, Bob's got 56 years. I've got 51. Bob I'd be in the valley hitchhiking back to Venice, and Bob lived in the valley. And he had kids and a wife, and he would drive me that 20 miles out of Canoga Park all the way to where I was going. And then he'd go all the way back home. And I doubt very much if I ever said thank you then, but I've said thank you a few times, since. And, I didn't, like Bob did that, not because he really felt like going driving, just to be clear, although maybe sometimes, but he did that because he was worried about a 13 or a 14-year-old girl just standing on the street at 1 o'clock in the morning getting in a car with strangers. But I wasn't worried. I didn't care. I didn't care about myself for a long time after I got sober. But I've been very fortunate that the people of Alcoholics Anonymous, have cared. And I've continued to show up. And I wanted to just tell you one other thing about the law job. After I'd been doing it for like 10 years or something, I can't remember exactly, one of my bosses called me in the office, and they said, hey, we want you to help train the new lawyers. And I said, oh. And they said, yeah, because we really like your attitude. And I thought, man, when I got sober in 1972, nobody thought I'd ever get a job for my attitude. Keep coming back.